Welcome back to another story from GraveyardDance.com, where we have a great story that is sure to intrigue you this week if you love the classic true crime stories of yesteryear. Today's horrific true crime tale of horror and madness takes place in the early 1930s in the city of Le Mans, France. It's also a cautionary tale of why you should always treat others the way you'd want to be treated, especially the hired help. The Papin sisters, Christine and Leah, came from a very dysfunctional family and lived somewhat of a hard life compared to most people of the time. The story actually starts many years earlier in the late 1800s. It began when their mother Clemence met their father Gustave Papin. The two began dating and started off well enough, but it wouldn't last. The two began to squabble constantly, and soon their mother Clemence took on a job and before long was being accused of having an extramarital affair with her employer by her now husband Gustave. Just 5 months after getting married, the couple's first child, a little girl named Amelia, was born. Gustave had begun drinking heavily by this point and started to make it known that he did not believe the child to be his, and announced to his wife they would be moving with his new job to a new city. Clemence wanted no part of it. She loved her job and had family and friends in Le Mans and wanted to stay. Clemence declared she would rather take her own life than leave Le Mans. Thankfully though, she didn't do it. Whether it was being taken away from the place and people she loved, or if it was her sad treatment given to her by her husband Gustave, or whether she had other inner issues, it's hard to say. What is known though was that she was not a loving mother by any means. The marriage started to deteriorate quickly after the move. As soon as she was old enough, their daughter Amelia was sent to Bon Pasteur Catholic orphanage to become a nun. It wasn't by choice though. Apparently, Gustave had gotten drunk and decided to have unhealthy relations with his then 9-year-old daughter. As sick as that is, it's about to get a whole lot sicker. Instead of Clemence's motherly instinct taking over and protecting the child, she instead blames her for it. Yep, you heard that right. She blamed a 9-year-old child for supposedly seducing her own father. In case y'all haven't noticed, there is a serious mental illness problem going on in this family. Christine, the eldest of the two sisters we're talking about today, came along 4 years later and was born on March 8 of 1905. By this time, Gustave was a drunkard who stayed that way most of the time, and as we said, Clemence wasn't exactly the motherly type and didn't want to be. Christine was given to her paternal aunt and uncle soon after birth. She lived happily with them for 7 years until their death. Leah was born on September 15, 1911, and as soon as she was born, she too was given to an uncle and lived there until he too died. Soon, Christine and Leah joined their older sister Amelia at the Bon Pasteur Catholic orphanage, which was said to have been a horrific and brutal place for the kids who lived there. It wasn't long before Amelia had had enough of her harsh treatment from not only her mother and father, but the orphanage as well. She decided to cut all ties with all of them and went on to become a nun and never saw her family again. Christine and Leah wasn't so lucky. This is where it gets really sad. By sending the girls to the orphanage, their mother had planned to make them live there until the age of 15, where they could then go get a job. That in itself probably didn't sound too bad for the time they lived in, but it derailed poor Christine's plans. She desperately wanted to follow in her sister's footsteps and enter the convent to become a nun too, but her mother wouldn't have it. She instead forced her into taking on the job as a housemaid, where eventually both her and her younger sister Leah would find employment. It was far from the job anyone could ever call fulfilling. Christine had been trained in various different household duties in the convent, making it easier to become a live-in maid. She was described as a hard worker and a good cook who could be insubordinate at times. Leah was described as quiet, introverted, and obedient, but was said to have been less intelligent than Christine. Employers were content with their work. However, Clemence was not satisfied with their pay and forced them to seek better paid opportunities. Yep, this horrible mother was basically forcing her daughters into hard labor and taking a large portion of their income. The sisters worked as maids in various Le Mans homes. They preferred to work together whenever possible though. By 1926, they found an employer where they could live together and work together. It almost seemed too good to be true, probably because it was. The Lancelin family lived at 6 Rue Brière in Le Mans, and consisted of Monsieur René Lancelin, a retired solicitor, his wife Madame Léonie Lancelin, and their younger daughter Geneviève lived in the house. At first, all went well, other than the long hours the poor girls had to endure. Imagine working for 14 hours a day cleaning every crevice of a huge home, cooking over a hot wood stove morning, noon and night, and only getting a half a day off each week. The girls literally had no life of their own. Still though, they made the best of it and was somewhat happy the first few years until Madame Léonie developed depression, and it soon became hell for the Papin sisters. They would constantly get berated and yelled at over every supposed mistake they ever made. Madame Léonie would even do white glove tests at the house, and if she found a spot of dust, she would punish the poor girls. There were even many occasions of Madame Lancelin physically assaulting the girls. The abuse worsened. At its peak she would slam the girls' heads against the wall over any reason she could find. You may ask why they stayed, but you have to remember this was the 1930s and resources to help women in need wasn't as abundant as they are now. For all intents and purposes, the poor girls really were stuck between a rock and a hard place with no help. It was about to go south, fast. On the night of February 2nd, 1933, Monsieur Lancelin was supposed to meet Madame Léonie and Geneviève for dinner at the home of a family friend. Madame Léonie and Geneviève had been out shopping that day. When they returned home that afternoon, no lights were on in the house. The girls tried to explain that the power was out due to a faulty clothing iron they had plugged in to do the ironing. That didn't go well at all. Madame Lancelin became enraged and attacked the girls on the first floor of the house. Christine and Leah's motives by this point is hard to tell. Were they angry and decided enough was enough, or were they terrified and simply fighting for their lives? Either way, Christine attacked Geneviève and gouged her eyes out and ordered her sister Leah to do the same to Madame Lancelin. After it was all said and done, both women were missing their eyes. Christine ran downstairs to the kitchen where she retrieved a knife and a hammer. She brought both weapons upstairs, where they continued their attack. At some point, one of the sisters grabbed a heavy pewter pitcher and used it to strike the heads of both Lancelin women. In the midst of the rage, they mutilated the buttocks and thighs of the victims. Later, Monsieur Lancelin got home to find the house dark. When he arrived at his friend's home, he found that his family was not there. He returned to his residence with his son-in-law. He assumed that his wife and daughter had left for the dinner party and went to the party as well. That was not the case. The only light they could see coming from the home was that of a soft candle coming from the room of Christine and Leah Papin. The door was jammed shut somehow, and something about the way the house looked spooked them. They decided to fetch the local police, and it was probably a good thing they did. The sight they were about to find was literally what nightmares are made of. The policeman finally got into the home by climbing over the garden wall and in through a window. Once inside, he found the bodies of Madame Lancelin and her daughter Geneviève. They had both been bludgeoned and stabbed to the point of being unrecognizable. Madame Lancelin's eyes had been gouged out and were found in the folds of the scarf around her neck, and one of Genevieve's eyes was found under her body and another on the stairs at the other end of the hallway. The shocked officer was afraid that he was going to go into the Papin sisters' room and find them with a similar horrific fate, but that's not at all what he found. What he found was very strange indeed. Their door was locked. After the officer knocked but received no response, he summoned a locksmith to open the door. Inside the room, he found the Papin sisters naked in bed together, and a bloody hammer, with hair still clinging to it, on a chair nearby. Sounds like something out of a cheesy 80s slasher film, but sadly, it wasn't. The girls now had some serious explaining to do. They both confessed immediately but said it was done in self-defense. At the trial, the immense love each sister had for the other was very apparent. Christine told the court that it was all her and that her sister Leah had nothing to do with it, and Leah did the same, claiming it was all her and Christine had nothing to do with it. They were placed in prison, but separated from each other. This was hard on both of them, but it proved to be especially hard for Christine. So much so that she tried to gouge her own eyes out and had to be put in a straitjacket. Prison officials finally allowed the two sisters to see each other. This is where this case takes another odd turn. Apparently, Christine threw herself at Leia, unbuttoning her blouse, begging her please, say yes, suggesting an incestuous sexual relationship. Hold on, I think I just puked a little. Anywho, moving on. The sister's chosen lawyer pleaded not guilty by reason of insanity. You just about have to be wanting to get jiggy with your sister. Just saying. They demonstrated signs of mental illness such as limiting eye contact and staring straight ahead, appearing to be in a daze. The court appointed 3 doctors to administer psychological evaluations of the sisters to determine their mental state. They concluded that the two had no mental disorders and deemed them sane and fit to stand trial. They also believed that Christine's affection for her sister was based on family ties, not an incestuous relationship as others had suggested. The court finally concluded that Christine and Leia suffered from shared paranoid disorder. After the trial, jurors took 40 minutes to determine that the Papin sisters were indeed guilty of the crime of which they had been accused. Leia, thought to be under the influence of her older sister, was given a 10-year sentence. Christine was initially sentenced to death at the guillotine, although that sentence was later commuted to life imprisonment. Being taken away from her sister and never being allowed to see her proved to be too much for Christine to handle. She wrote various letters begging and pleading to be with Leia, but officials said no and would not allow it. She was sent to a mental institution in Rennes, where they hoped they could get her some much needed mental help, but it never worked. When she realized she would never see Leia again, she decided to starve herself to death. She passed away May 18 of 1937. Leia only served 8 years of her 10-year sentence and was released in 1941. When she became free, she lived in the town of Nantes, where she was joined by her mother. She assumed a false identity and earned a living as a hotel maid. Many say that she died in 1982, but according to French film producer Claude Ventura, claims to have discovered Leia living in a hospice center in France in 2000. While making the film Enquête des Sœurs Papin, or the English version In Search of the Papin Sisters, the woman who claimed to be Leia had suffered a stroke which had rendered her partially paralyzed and unable to speak. This woman died in 2001. Both sisters are buried together in the cemetery Bouderie in Nantes. Rest in peace, ladies, rest in peace. If you liked today's story, we hope you'll throw in a big thumbs up to help our channel grow. We appreciate all the folks who take time out of their busy day to enjoy our content. It means a lot to us. If you have a story you'd like us to consider, drop it in the comments below. Also, check out our merch. We have some really badass t-shirts, mugs and all types of other goodies. You'll love him, we promise. Anywho, catch y'all next time.